Just gonna check something. All right. I'm so excited to see people pop up in here. I've been alone for a little while. I'm just gonna give it maybe one more minute. I don't know if there's more that might be coming. Um, but I would also gives me a second to get my presentation together and give you a little sense of what to expect. So this is Books and Beyond. Hopefully this is where you intended to be. If it's not where you intended to be, hopefully you'll still stick around and maybe find something interesting and or entertaining. I'm Stephanie Winship, and I am a speech language pathologist. I have, oh, I should also let you know this is being recorded so that we can have access to this information throughout the school year for families who weren't able to be here today. So again, I am Stephanie. I'm a speech language pathologist. I've been working with Sturgeon Public Schools for many, many years, more than I'm willing to say out loud, primarily in the early intervention area, so pre-kindergarten and kindergarten, but with some interesting adventures into grade school as well. I truly believe that communication is everything. It is so integral to our humanity and intertwined with all parts of daily functioning and our development. So I really love to talk about speech and language and communication. So I will be doing lots of talking today. So I apologize. There won't be a whole bunch of breakout groups or hands-on stuff for this first session. I'm sure some of you will be disappointed by that, but we will welcome any kind of questions or comments, especially as we get along to some of the books, which is my favorite part. You'll notice that this is a very bare bones, simplistic kind of presentation or slideshow. That's because of my personal learning journey with technology, including some wild experiences with artificial intelligence, which I was trying to use to make my life easier and to make this even better. And I found the product really frustrating. So that explains the very minimalist type of slide. But I thought it was also good to mention, just because I think with our littles, they are experiencing that kind of challenge and that process. And it's really a good reminder that the process is not linear. There's some ups and downs, and that there's some feeling involved. There can be some frustration and also some really positive feelings as well. I also, one other caveat, this is not a session about how to teach my child to read. I'm not a teacher. I am a speech language pathologist, but there is a lot of overlap between the skills in developing literacy, so that ability to read and write, and in developing communication. So we can kind of work on those together. Plus, there's so many ways that that literacy, that print and books can be used to work on our other speech language skills or many other skills as well. Now, with my, and one more caveat, you can hear my voice is not quite 100%. I am recovering from a cold. So I apologize. I also have something to help keep me hydrated. And if I try to not cough, it tends to get really ugly in terms of spasmodic coughing. So please forgive me if I do cough along the way. It's prettier than the alternative. And if I need to take a break, I'll give you a signal. Just a, we'll see how my technology is doing here, but can you indicate, if you were one of those people who is an eager reader, raise a hand. Or if you're one of those people who avoided reading, maybe raise a hand. What I'm hoping with this presentation is that we get our kiddos to that place where they are able to enjoy reading. It's a really useful tool for them, and hopefully even become something that is comforting to them or pleasurable, so that they've got that great resource as they get older. As I mentioned, literacy is the ability to read and write. It is really language made more permanent. It's tangible. We can see it. Auditory language actually is very quick. It goes by, and it doesn't necessarily have some of the same structure that we think of with print, but we'll get to that in a minute. In schools, reading instruction typically involves both a system of teaching sight words. So those are learned by memory. They're just rote chunks that you associate a visual with a meaning, and you learn it as a whole unit. But there's also the decoding system, where we're really looking at the connection between sounds and letters, and then how those sounds and letters go together to make words. And then when we change those sounds and letters, when we manipulate them, it changes meaning. In speech language pathology, we often talk about phonological awareness, the ability to recognize a variety of sound units and to recognize that words are made up of those sound units, as well as the ability to manipulate the sound units and recognize how that changes its meaning. To be able to break the word down to its component parts is really important when we're working with kids with speech sounds. We need for them to first be able to isolate, to hear a separate sound, to be able to hear the difference between what the target sound is and what maybe their air pattern is, and then to be able to change, to manipulate what they're doing to something different. So this is really a higher level phonological awareness skill involved with speech sound practice. And if you'll notice, this really is actually very much the same as decoding. So that's why working on the two, both through the speech and literacy angles, is beneficial. There are many phonological awareness processes. Forgive me as I'm a little, you can see me trying to read my tabs at the top of my screen. I did this really cool black box, but it's a little dark. Thank you for your patience. These are some examples of the phonological awareness skills. So I think one of the really important things to notice is there is a bit of a progression. There are some that are more foundational at the bottom, and then as we progress along, they become more complex. I would say that at the bottom, there's even some really basic things like recognizing that a sentence is made up of words. Because whereas as we grow, we often tend to think of sentences the way we read them, where you've got those nice little white spaces between the words and some punctuation at the end to indicate where one ends and another one is beginning. When we are speaking, we actually don't as clearly differentiate those pauses and that separation between sentences. So it is something for kids just to be able to pull out a word from within a group of other words, from within a sentence. Another skill that we don't see on there as much is syllable recognition. So syllables are those chunks of words that always include a vowel. And they can be kind of hard to define even, but you know them when you hear them. So flower has 2 syllables, helicopter has 4, sun has 1. And that is something that we can work on with kids at that really early stage too, separate from print, but is important for them when they're learning to print. Alliteration is one of my favorites. That's why this is called Books and Beyond. Language and literacy is when you're putting those 2 first sounds the same, close together. It helps with the flow, and it's very it's more engaging and memorable. Where often teaching starts, but again, I'd recommend studying these good foundations, is when we're looking at those actual little segments or sounds. And so you need to be able to recognize that a word is made up of different sounds, just like a sentence has got different word components. A word has different sound components. So in sun, there's 3 sound components, whereas in black, there's 4 sound components. There's also being able to associate each of those sounds with the way we make them. And then where it really comes into that literacy part and where phonological awareness connects with phonics or phonemic awareness is when we're making that connection with print. So then you're associating a sound with a letter. And that is a really important school skill that we see worked on a lot in kindergarten. And is also really what I'm asking for my kids working with sounds to be thinking. They're associating a sound pattern, a production pattern with a sound. And then we typically do name it and give it that print because that's a great visual cue. It's a great way to connect all of those pieces together. As you progress up through your phonological awareness, you do develop all those other skills of being able to then take a sound out of a word or put sounds together to make a word, to be able to change a sound in the word. And really, that's when we start to be playful with language, and you get a lot of humor and puns from some of those plays on words. Oh, excuse me. So once we've got a foundation in that learning to read, you start to get that developmental foundation. At some point, usually around grade 4, there's a good amount of skill in both decoding and a good set of sight words. Kids have developed longer, more complex structures that they can read, and they've got fluency. They're able to read with some ease and speed, and while also comprehending. And at that point, reading becomes more of a tool to learn other things. And in a similar way, whereas we're not asking our preschoolers to start to turn around and to use actual print to teach themselves content, we can use those print materials, books, and other text to develop skills such as speech and language, but also so many more. I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but does anyone want to put in the chat or give an idea of some of the skills that we'll develop using sprinter books. You could think about it. We are coming back to that. I'm just giving you a heads up. I don't want to make anyone anxious. Hopefully, because you're here, I'm kind of preaching to the choir. You already value books and literacy, but I think it's nice to make some of these points because books are so prevalent. Again, we want to make our kids be literate and enjoy literacy. So that pleasurable part of reading is typical for most people, but not for all. And I know there's some reluctant readers out there. The one thing I would note, though, that at this early age, sharing that process and sharing that experience is very typical. It's what's needed, really, to make it successful for the child. And it also makes it just so much more pleasurable. It is a nice time for shared connection between adult and child. The other great thing about books is that they are inclusive. We can find a book to suit any learner with any level of communication. They can participate and benefit from books. And that is probably because of the great variety in books. There's such an incredible range in the topics, in the formats, and the language levels, which is kind of, I've got a whole table full of them here. That's the part that excites me to talk about. With interests, you want to take from all of those many, many diverse topics and formats and pick something that matches your child's interests, that's really going to be engaging for them, because that's where we get intention. That's when the words are more meaningful and more memorable. And then we can also use books when we just have an emerging interest. Maybe it's really not a strong and preferred interest yet, but we can use books to start to begin to expand and give more exposure, experience with an interest, and maybe it will grow into something else. Another reason why I think books are so valuable is they are flexible. You can adapt a book to different situations, the attention level of the child, their language level, the things that are going on right now and you could want to emphasize within the book. And then flexible, again, that we can work on any type of skill within a book. So we're not just working on reading, we can work on a lot of other stuff as well. And books are meaningful. They are such a common thing, particularly in school. You've got a lot of book reports ahead of you, but they're also, a major way of how information is shared in the schooling. And then they just become part of community and personal life as well. So I think, again, if we can inspire that from our early learners and they can maintain that interest, it's going to be a great benefit to them. So I have to go back. I don't see anyone did any brave guesses into all these skills I keep talking about that can be developed through book sharing. So I'll talk about a few of them, but you're free to add others. One of the most basic skills that are required in interaction and communication is joint attention. The ability to share focus between a thing and a partner. And that doesn't just mean I'm going to, attend to the thing or I'm going to attend to the partner. It's actually going between the object, the partner, the object, and back, and sharing that connection. That is the basis for communication and interaction. And books give you a great common point. And if you have sort of that interactive framework set up where you are both able to look at, touch, and talk about the book, it really nicely leads to that shared attention. Early learning concepts, of course, we see a lot in books targeted for preschoolers. So things like numeracy, the counting, uh, shapes and colors, but also just building their vocabulary, what they know of nouns, so people and things, their action words, words for describing. So those size words like big and small, quantity words like all or none, one or some. The idea of position words like behind, under, beside, textures like rough or smooth or cold, and feeling words, which of course are so important, especially for little people as they're just beginning to understand their feelings. All those happy, sad, mad, frustrated type words. We can also work on speech sounds through books. Now, there's some books that might be really well focused on a speech sound in a really great way to bombard and provide lots and lots of opportunities to hear a speech sound. But with most texts, you can pick out those common high frequency sounds, sounds that occur a lot uh, in the book, and then find ways to really emphasize them, whether paraphrasing a little bit, using opportunities to bring those words with target sounds back into the conversation, or repeating entire sections, or then your questions and answers. It can also be a chance to contrast sounds too. So sometimes kids will um, make an error and it's what we would call a minimal pair. It changes the word, and that can be something you can draw attention to and use as a starting point. The phonological awareness is all that ream of skills that we've already talked about, particularly with when we get to reading whole text. Rhyme is such an important one, both in terms of language and recognizing um, word shapes and word families, but also it's really that makes the book more predictable and allows the child to take a turn because it narrows down the choice of what a word might be, and then they might be more likely to fill in that word, and then they're reading, they're taking part in the reading. When you're sharing books, that means that there's a little bit of waiting and turn taking. If it's not just a solitary self-directed activity, then we're incorporating these really important social communication skills of waiting and turn taking. And then pre-literacy skills, which sometimes we don't think about, but that is where we're starting with some of our little friends. Really, the first step of literacy is learning that books aren't for eating. And then, how to hold a book, how to turn one page at a time, that the pages go from front to back. And then we start to look at the connections between pictures and print. And we start to look at the way the words go across the page from left to right. And all of that you need before you can pick up a book and actually read it. I will just note that I like to talk about book sharing because I do really think that that's the better way to frame it for our young readers, because they're not really reading text for the most part. They're not decoding much of the text, or if any, they might recognize some sight words. Um, but they are experiencing the literacy, and they are working on all those skills, but they need the guide. And that partner piece, besides being so essential to their learning, is also what gives us those other great opportunities for things like joint attention and for the social communication skills like taking turns. Anyone with any questions or comments? Feel free to interrupt me. So I really do love that book sharing. I think the first place it starts, as I said, is just that whole what are books for? How do we work with a book? How do we hold it? The tracking. I do, when possible, like to draw attention to the title and to the author and the illustrator if there's one, or if they may be the same people, they may be different people. I think it's nice to note and just to briefly define, the author's the person who wrote it, the illustrator is the person who drew the picture. Again, when we're looking ahead to all those book reports, that's really useful. That's where you start. But also, I think, sets the stage for our young people for when they are the creators, when they are their authors and illustrators of their own story. I think it's really valuable, maybe even essential if you want to get the most out of books, to make it interactive. I know I went through school with the read aloud time where teacher talked, and we all sat very quietly in our desks and did not utter a sound. And sometimes bedtime stories were like that too. You sat, you listened, you were quiet. And there is some benefit to that for sure. You're still hearing language, you're still getting some really great just story structure and vocabulary and things. But especially for kids who are learning language and for kids who are learning to read, the opportunity to be more interactive, to take some turns both as a listener and a speaker, is really valuable. It makes them have more interest and ownership in the activity. It makes them learning more memorable, and it gives you a better sense of what they are learning or understanding or interested in, what's catching their eye with any story. So, I know in my family when my kids were little, we gave up books as a bedtime activity because it was interactive and it was a little bit escalating. It was not a good, calming, quiet activity. Yeah, great language activity, but not a good calming activity. It was it's a trade-off. But as a speech language pathologist, I appreciated that. It's really important, if we're going to truly make it interactive, though, that we're giving our children time to participate and remembering that children need more time than we do. You've probably heard at least once, maybe twice today, if you've been to other sessions, the importance of wait time, and that counting and complete silence, even though you're such natural helpers and you want to guide or prompt, really allowing a little bit of silence, or even really setting up the pause. So you've gone and you've done a pattern, done it one time, two times, the third time you're pausing so the child can fill in that last bit. With questions, they're a wonderful, excellent communication tool. But I think it's important to remember that nobody really likes being quizzed. So we want to be balancing the questions that we're asking with lots of comments. So you're making observations. I see, or look at that, or you're doing wonders like, wonder what that guy's doing over there. You're maybe giving some preferences. Oh, really like the color of that truck. Things that give a language model and keep the interaction going, but don't put as much pressure on the child to answer, but do give them an opportunity. When we are asking questions, I always like to start with open-ended questions. Tell me about. But those open-ended questions are more complex and they are more abstract. So they can be a bit more overwhelming and take a lot more processing. So once I've given some time, I've paused to allow a child to respond, I'm going to support the answer and maybe give some choice options. Well, do you think it was this or that? Or if they're really struggling or just hesitant, I might even bring it down to a yes or no question. I know vocabulary learning is a big part of why we want to do this. And for some kids, it's really motivating. But I would caution also that some kids do react to just labeling. So when we're looking at a book and we're just naming all the things and then turning the page and naming all the things, that doesn't necessarily give as much meaning or as much excitement, or it just, again, feels a little bit like being quizzed. So where there's definitely a place for that, and some kids will love it, I would watch to make sure that is balanced as well. Sorry, so I'm skipping around between slides. Using your child's interests can be just almost magical when you're getting them to look at a book. If you have those reluctant readers or some of those kiddos who are, really very satisfied in their own self-directed activities, book sharing can be really tricky. And having a strong preferred interest that you can represent in the book is such a great gateway to start to begin that process. But while those interests are a really important component, there are so many other good things about books to look for when you're choosing kind of a right fit book. I love books that have repetition in them. They give, those repeated opportunities to either hear the sentence pattern or to follow, to follow the content. So then they're able to predict what comes next. And that makes them, again, more likely to join in. And I know parents always ask me about, like, oh, my kid has asked me to read the same book at bedtime 60 times in a row. And I empathize, I do, because I know it's hard for the adults, but that really is so beneficial for your kiddos because it gives them that familiarity and that opportunity to participate. You could also make the most of any book by choosing what you highlight, the words that you give more emphasis, you draw attention to with your facial expression and your intonation. You try and bring them in as many times as possible. And maybe you can even connect those words with the pictures or with your gestures. And then you're really reinforcing that vocabulary. And I'll even do that with sounds too, where if I'm working on a sound and, the sneaky snake is slithering, I'm going to hit those S's really hard. I'm going to say them with a little bit more emphasis. I might do the gestures I'm saying them. I'm going to try and work those words in even where the text doesn't say, just to get as much bang for my buck out of the experience. Just another little thing about questions. Those who, what, when, where, why questions are, of course, very meaningful and something we want to work on. But not all WH questions are equal. The ones that are uh, learned earliest are what in terms of things and who. So those really more concrete questions. Often they're picturable, so there's something to reference in the book. What happens is similar. So that's the event that's going, and usually there's something you can see to indicate it, or there's something more familiar or more concrete. Where can be something that you can see. It can be quite obvious, but it can be also be something that requires a bit of knowledge of the context. So that one's a little more complex. When questions are even more complex, because time is quite an abstract concept for children, uh, for them, 10 minutes tomorrow and next year can all feel the same. So when questions are really tricky, I almost always tend to support with a choice when I'm giving a when question when I'm working with my littles, or if I ask a when question, I accept any when answer. So if they tell me, if I ask when something happened, and if they say at night, or if they say summer, or if they say Tuesday, I would accept any of those answers. Those are all time word answers. And then I'm going to shape it to whichever is sort of the most appropriate for the situation we're discussing. Why questions are the most complex and the most abstract. And I don't think that means we should avoid doing them with kids, but I do think it means we might need to do a little bit more either review or preview, giving it a little bit more support. It's also why I think it's, something we want to be really careful with in natural circumstances about asking why questions. Because at least when we're talking about books or pictures, we have that reference. We have something that's permanent that we can go back to and to help us to break that down. Whereas if it's something that just happened 10 minutes ago, there's nothing necessarily for the kid to hold on to help them to break out that causality. One of the things that I think helps to prevent that over-labeling and coming just a little bit more fluid, it helps you to become more fluid, commenting and asking questions, is when we look at those relationships among events or characters. And that really leads nicely into the descriptions of settings or characters later. Ken, look for it to come in. When we emphasize time words like first and then, before and after, that can be really helpful to getting that ordering of events, which is so important for us when we order our own thoughts and we're talking about our own activities. It's really great also to start to look at those connections and relationships in terms of feeling words. Nice way to connect feeling words with some examples and then help to relate that to children's personal experience. We can continue to build on the book sharing even when we don't have the book there. Retelling the story is so fun for most kids, and it can be that repetition that again is so valuable, but it gives a little bit of variety too, and that novelty helps to make things more memorable as well. So you can start with figurines or puppets or clippings from the paper or dress up clothes, or in any way start to reenact or play out the events of a story. You just want to keep reinforcing some of those key words, and it's a familiar sequence, especially for stories that have that common motif that they're going to see coming up. And our fairy tales are really good for that. Often I will pull a theme word or some key vocabulary words, whether it's a concept like big and small, or whether it's a speech sound that I want to target, and I'll pull those words down and use them in games. So the book gives a context to help make that learning more meaningful and hopefully motivating as well. And a last way to sort of, again, get more from a book or build on a book is to look at variations of the same story. So, with our fairy tales, there's lots of different variations that you can look at. And maybe the setting has changed or some of the characters are different. And you can talk about some of the ways that they're the same or different. And this is such a great way to look at the skills of same and different and contrasting and comparing. And it really helps kids to start to be really consumers of what they're reading. I'll give you an example. A few years ago, I took a deep dive into fairy tales. kind of an addiction. So with the one story, for example, Jack and the Beanstalk, I would have several. Where's my camera? Oh, I won't show. You're going to see my black box here for a second. You'll know why I have. Besides the fact that the background is books, which was really what I wanted to have behind me for this presentation. You'll see here in just a second. Hopefully. Maybe not. Well, I had it on. Kind of in a black box. So this is a traditional telling of the story. And that in itself, I could find in many different versions, some shorter, some longer, some with more cartoony pictures, some with more lifelike pictures. Then there's variations that take a story, a familiar story and a character from another series. This is Little Critter. So taking a familiar character, putting them in that familiar story, kind of reinforces both. Then you have things like the fractured fairy tales, or they take those elements and twist them a little bit. This example is Jack and the Giant Barbecue. Or there's ways to make them more interactive. This is my pop-up version. And then this is an example of some of those extension things. I found some little puppets of the giant and Jack. But they didn't have to be actual. You can use other things and just assign them those names and those meanings. And kids have wonderful imaginations that will help them with that process. I'll just make a note now that if you're not an SLP with an addiction to books, and you don't want to purchase 18 varieties of the same book, public libraries are, of course, outstanding resources that have almost infinite options at low cost or no cost. And then you can take advantage of school libraries potentially. And there's so many of those little libraries or book sharing, book lending type programs going on. I think it's a wonderful thing, and I would encourage you to take advantage. Sorry. That leads me a little bit more to just some other discussion of books. We look at books, we can kind of break them into categories. I'll tell you right off that I find almost every book fits into more than one category, but I'll give you some ideas. So the realistic picture books are those that have, we're gonna have to do this again, have actual photos in them so that they can really be very literal. That can be really effective for some kids. That could be their preference, just more meaningful that way. I'll just as a quick aside, we tend to have a hierarchy when we're thinking of visuals for kids. So that photo, everything's so shiny, is the most literal representation of the actual object, and that's therefore usually the easiest for kids to understand. And then it progresses from, drawings that are realistic to more plain or cartoony kind of drawings, to simple line drawings, to print. So a little bit of an aside, but it is something to think of when you're making those book choices too, and looking at your best options. What's going to work better for your kids? Something that's a more concrete, literal, or maybe they're more engaged with those things that are a little simpler and cartoon-like. Most of our kids are not just at the point where they're just reading print, but that is the eventual goal. Another example of the realistic book, but that also leads into the other category of personal book, is that idea of the photo albums. So this one is Baby's Busy Day. Oh, and I was going to show you, but it turns out I forgot I'd put in some client pictures in here, so and change some of the words. But that idea of taking something really meaningful, pictures of yourself, and activities that are really meaningful, and putting them together. And this one was one I got as a gift, but you could do that just with any slip-in photo album or printed photos, or doing that kind of the clip and paste thing. I have another example of these that I always like to show because I need to credit my mom, who's an amazing mom and just deserves all the credit. But way back many years ago, she had done this book for me when I was a baby, filled with pictures of babies and toys, and then body parts, other animals. So things that she thought I was interested in or would like to know, and she clipped them out of flyers and magazines and put them in a book. And that was just, I remember, I obviously loved it, still have it many years later. And really, she just intuitively knew how to pick words that were meaningful, give me opportunities to look at them, to hear her talk about them, and then begin to talk about them myself. Great for language learning as well as literacy. Oh, jeez. I'm not in jail, I promise. So board books, probably you're familiar with for little kids. They're durable, which is great. But the other great thing about them is the thicker pages are easier to turn. So you can take things like our familiar stories, like Goodnight Gorilla, which comes in other formats as well. But in a board book, it's also just a little simpler and shorter, which makes it even better for our kiddos. Interactive books are those that include some features that give the child a chance to take a turn. It can be really overt things like sounds, or lift the flap type books where you have to see what's behind or under. So many good ones of those. It could be a little more I don't know if actually I would say it's more subtle, but you've got your books with texture, right? So the touch and feel, which you're working on vocabulary in terms of describing, but they're also really motivating. You can have things like the I Spy book, where the turns for looking are built right in. Things that have slides, things that have drawing elements, things that have pop-up. Those are all interactive books and very motivating for young learners. And you can also find a lot of those that also, so I said things tend to fall in more than one category. So like this one was good for describing words, is also good for seasonal words, because this is a Easter one. You might have this one. It's one of my favorites. It's a good for animal vocabulary. So yeah, you're always working on lots of things at one time. And one other little aside, one of the things that I have learned to do, if I have a book where the content is really where we're following a strong interest and it's good language level, but it's very static and I need something more interactive to engage a child, I've started just using Post-it notes over some of those interesting bits. and they remove easily, but you can lift them up and you've made your own lift the flap book. And that can just be that little difference to get a bit more involvement from your child. We've talked a lot about special interests. That can be like a real strong passion. I have a whole series of books on rocks and minerals because for a couple of years I had some kids who were really into that. And I followed their lead, and then I got interested. It could be about a character, like Lightning McQueen. This was my son's world when we were growing up. We probably had a shelf full of books about Lightning McQueen. And it's a big part of why he's a reader today, because he was a reluctant reader, but these were the ones that were motivating for him. I think one of the great things about pre-kindergarten books or kindergarten books, even early elementary, is that they have that rhythm or rhyme really often built in. Some are like Chicka Chicka Boom, Will There Be Enough Room, or any of the Dr. Seuss books with the lilting language, the fun sounding words, the use of alliteration. All of those things are great for catching attention. You can use books like books that build on tunes. That can also be really engaging for some kids. Music is so memorable and really helps to carry meaning. So that's a great option for kids who like to move a lot and love to dance, but maybe are reluctant readers. And then, of course, storybooks. Those often are less common for our pre-K kids. Often to find something with a really clear beginning, middle, and end is more challenging. They tend to be more descriptive or focus on some of the vocabulary building or the interactive elements. But there are, of course, lots of good options still. And because things can always, work in more than one way, you might have a good story, but something like this with the color monster. And then we're working on vocabulary words as well that are so useful in terms of feelings. This was actually also interactive, and it's kind of a board book. So, it's all the things. One of the things I know I often get asked is, what about kids who are those reluctant readers and really maybe a little bit destructive with books? So one of the things that we can think about is just non-traditional formats. Bath books are made, with obviously that water-resistant material, and so they're going to last longer. Or the fabric type books. That might encourage chewing for some, but for I think most is going to be a little aversive. And then I'll just mention also for our littles, little books. These are not great stories, but they are great size with simple pictures, meaningful words that might be just this first step to really get kids reading. So I very much appreciate everyone's time. I am sadly not surprised that I filled it with talking for so long, and I appreciate your listening. I, again, appreciate any questions or comments, especially if you as parents have any suggestions on the things that have helped your readers or that maybe didn't work but could help another parent. And I always love to know want to know your book suggestions. What is the favorite in your house? So thank you very much for everyone listening. I think I will sort of sign this off in terms of the official recording, but I will be available